Today I'm going to give you all the details on a sliding door access panel. This is something that I featured in a recent video I did, kind of a showcase of 38 different upgrades and mods here on my Pinnacle. So if you haven't seen that, definitely check it out, as it kind of gives you a context. But I had a couple questions on this particular sliding access panel door and how to make this mod. And it's actually pretty simple, but what it is it's just a sliding access panel here, and it gives you easier access to everything that's back here, from your water pumps, you know, to the back side of your Nautilus panel, to even the leveling controls there for the equalizer system, and just a lot of other wires that you might need access to. And you know, my thinking, the reason I wanted this is that if there is a problem with your water pump or a leak back there or the equalizer system or whatever else, you know, I don't want to have to be taking off screws. I mean, Jayco supplied this access panel from the factory, but they just had 4 screws, one in each corner, affixing it permanently to this side. And I appreciate the fact that they at least made the cutout and put the access panel there, because a lot of brands might not do that to begin with. But I really wanted to take it a step further and make it easier and quicker for me to gain access, so that if something does go wrong, I can easily get to it. And folks, I've already had to use this at least twice on different camping trips where something small went bad and I needed to gain access. And so it was super easy just to be able to push this and slide it open and be able to get right in here right away. And I'll just mention, I did a similar mod, an access panel kind of like this one on my last fifth wheel, only it was on the opposite side on the passenger. But the big difference there was the manufacturer did not do the cutout in the access panel ahead of time. And so I actually had just a solid wall right here and had to make the cutout, you know, make the access panel, cover it and everything with the carpet. So I really do, again, appreciate the fact that Jayco, you know, had the foresight to put that access panel in there to begin with. But on my last fifth wheel, when I did this mod, I actually ended up using spring-loaded hinges. And so instead of it opening up and sliding like this, it just had 2 spring-loaded hinges on it, and then the actual door would open just like a cabinet door, a traditional cabinet door. And because they were spring-loaded, then the door would stay shut in transit, so I didn't have to worry about it opening up there. So that technically is an easier way to do a mod like this. I mean, just to put some traditional spring-loaded hinges on the access panel, and then you'd be all set. But you can see in my situation here, that would not work because of these rails. So these rails here are what supports that pull-out storage tray. You can see I've got it pushed all the way toward the passenger side, so I can show you a little bit better here on video. But you can see the height of these rails goes up high enough where if I had put hinges on this access panel and tried to open it, it would bump into the rails right here and I wouldn't be able to open it. So I had actually gone out to the home center and bought those spring-loaded hinges and was going to do this mod, and then came back home and you know, realized, okay, that's not going to work, because as soon as I put those on, it's just going to bump in here. And so that's where I had to put my thinking cap on and think about another option that would work, and that's where I came up with the sliding door. So this really works well. But again, if you don't have these rails in the way and maybe you just want something a little bit simpler, you could just put some hinges on there that are spring-loaded and call it done. All right, so let's talk the details and specifics for this particular mod. And it's really quite simple. All it is a drawer slide at the top there and a drawer slide at the bottom there. And these are actually just regular drawer slides, the same kind of drawer slides that you would have in a kitchen drawer, you know, in your house on a cabinet. The only difference is these are full extension, which a lot of modern kitchen cabinets are full extension drawers, and that just means the drawer opens all the way so you get access even to the back of the drawer, as opposed to a standard drawer slide that maybe only opens about 3/4 of the way and you don't get access to the rear of the drawer. So the reason why you want that full extension is that you want this access panel to open all the way. You don't want it to stop short, because then your opening is cut and you really don't have full access there. So again, you just want full extension, and you're going to know that by having 3 sections. You got 1, 2, and then there's a 3rd section kind of hidden back behind this panel, and that's what makes it a full extension drawer slide. And then you also want it to be soft close. The reason you want it to be soft close is not so much for the, you know, convenience of it closing on its own, but you don't want this drawer slide opening and closing while you're in transit. And soft close drawer slides, they kind of have like a spring mechanism that kind of sucks them, you know, shut, and then keeps them shut until you put some force and apply some force to open it. So you can see right now I'm kind of pulling on this drawer pull and the door isn't opening, and that's because it's a soft close mechanism, so it's got some tension in there. So I've got to really pull it with a decent amount of force to get it to open. So again, you just want to make sure it's a full extension drawer slide with the soft close. And then as far as picking a specific drawer slide, you know, the size, you're going to measure the width of your access panel here, the actual panel itself, not the opening that it's covering, but the panel here. You just want to measure across from edge to edge. And then you want to pick a drawer slide that's just slightly under that. So in my case, the width across here, I think was just over 14 inches. And so I ended up going with a 14-inch drawer slide. You don't want that drawer slide to be larger than your access panel, because otherwise it's going to protrude and you'll see some of it on either edge. You can see in this case, the drawer mechanism, the slide is kind of concealed and tucked away there. All right, so again, just measure the width across here, and that'll get you the right drawer slide length. You don't want to measure your opening, because that's going to be a lot less than the panel itself typically, and if you do that, it's not going to open all the way and give you full access to that panel. So just measure across. In my case, it was 14 inches. I will include a link in the description below with the specific one that I purchased, in case you're in the same boat as me and yours is at 14 inches across. Okay, so I've got the access panel door removed so I can get you all the install details, which, by the way, you can remove these just like a kitchen drawer. In your kitchen, you can see it's got those little black tabs on the rail, and you just push up or down depending on the orientation, and then that whole panel is going to slide out of there just like a drawer would in your house in the kitchen there. Of course, you're going to need two of the drawer slides. You know, most of the time these are sold in pairs anyway, but you're going to need two, one for the bottom and one for the top. So just make sure you get a pair, and you want them to be the exact same so that it opens smoothly. But as far as the install and mounting and everything, you can see the spacing here. This is the leading edge, by the way, so let me just put it up here in the orientation it would be mounted. So you can see this is the leading edge here, and as I flip it down, you can see I've left about maybe 3/8 of an inch, 1/4 inch to 3/8 of an inch right here on the leading edge of spacing. And then on the bottom, I've only left probably about an 1/8 inch down on the bottom. And that was mainly due to the height of the opening here. I wanted to make sure that I maximized that. You know, I think they cut the opening a little bit large too, so I was a little bit limited there. But basically spread those, you know, as close as you can get to the edge there, just a small 1/8 inch gap. And you'll notice on the rear edge, I left a much bigger space. And again, I can get away with that because this is a full extension slide. Of course, you've got the soft close mechanism here, then you've got your first slide, your second slide, and then your third slide, the rail that's mounted to the wall there permanently. So because it's full extension, you can get away with some space like that. This is probably a little bit less than an inch right here. All right, so that kind of gives you an idea. Again, this was a 14-inch drawer slide, or that's what they labeled it as. So if you were between sizes, you know, I'd say go a little bit smaller, knowing that with the full extension, you're going to have a little bit of play there, and it's still going to open all the way because it's a full extension slide there. And then as far as mounting this, I believe I had to cut away some of the carpet. You know, when they put this carpet on and they pull the edges over it in the corners, there's usually a bunch of fabric kind of bunched up, and so you want this surface to be nice and even that you mount the drawer slide on. Otherwise, if it's not, there's going to be kind of like a bow in the drawer slide, and then it's not going to open and close real smoothly. So I think I had to trim out some of that surplus fabric that was just left there, so that there's a single, you know, consistent layer of carpet all the way under it. And I probably just stapled some of that excess as I cut away to make sure that, you know, nothing's going to come undone and start peeling off there. So just make sure your fabric is even all the way. And then really it's just a matter of laying the slide on here using the spaces. You want to be consistent on the top and the bottom. You don't want to be, you know, using a different set of dimensions on the top. Otherwise it won't be square, of course, when you go and mount everything. And then it's just got I think three screws. Yeah, you can see one there as you kind of slide this. You see a second one and then a third one over there. And so then you're just going to screw through and secure the slide here to the access panel. Now, I can't remember, I believe they came with these screws here, but it was about 6 months ago, a little over 6 months, I think I did this. So I'm having a hard time remembering, but sometimes when I do these slides, I have to buy different screws that are either longer or shorter. You know, in this case, you don't want the screw to go through the access panel and come out the other side. Otherwise, you'll feel it and see it, and you don't want that. But at the same time, you want it to be long enough that it grabs into the wood so that, you know, this slide isn't falling out. So I might have had to get some different length screws there, so just kind of factor that in. You might have to make a trip to the hardware store. But, you know, 1, 2, 3 points is pretty solid for the mounting, and same thing on the top there. Okay, so that's the first step, to mount what I'm going to call the drawer portion of the slides to the access panel. And then the second step is to mount these rails that are on the wall. But this is a lot easier if you take the rails and actually insert them back in here to the drawer slides, which, you know, you've got to remove these rails anyway to get access to your screws to mount these drawer slides. So basically you're going to take the rails, pretend that they're not mounted up here, and you're going to insert them back into the slides just the way that they would fit when installed. And then what you're going to do is extend the slide all the way out. So your second slide is all the way out, and then your rails up here are mounted inside of here, and they're pulled all the way out. So we'll do this on the top and the bottom. And then you're going to go ahead and put the door into position. All right, so if you've got a pull-out tray, you kind of have to weave it in here. And then you can imagine kind of what this looks like. So imagine that those rails are inserted here in the drawer slides. And this makes it really easy because now you just have to line up the drawer, the access panel, where you want it, and then secure the rails with screws. And so keeping those rails into the slides makes this whole mounting process a lot easier, as opposed to, you know, trying to measure the distance and get it right. I mean, this way, if they're mounted, it's gonna perfectly, you know, fit together. And then mounting the top and bottom rails is pretty straightforward. The only thing that's a little bit tricky, at least in my case here, was the way Jayco cut the height of this opening. Of course, they weren't thinking about someone coming back later and doing this drawer slide, and so they made the opening pretty tall, just a little bit less than the actual access panel. So you can see, if I come a little bit closer, I've got a screw holding in the rail here, but I couldn't quite get anything there, and that's because this is just carpet back here. You know, there's nothing solid for me to go into, and I certainly could have added some wood here at the top if I wanted, but I ended up just putting a screw in here and then another one back behind this sliding portion right there. Then on the bottom, I don't know if you'll be able to see this. Let me see if I can get a close-up shot. Yeah, I don't think you'll be able to see it, but I got 3 screws. I got one here, and then I got one right in the middle, and then a third one back there. So I was able to get just barely into the frame here of that opening. So that was really the only tricky thing. I mean, you know, having 2, you know, securely mounted access points on that rail is going to be more than sufficient, especially how light this panel is there. But all that to say, if you are cutting your own access panel, you know, make sure that you make the hole, the cutout, at least, you know, 2 inches smaller on the top and bottom, so that you've got something for that top and bottom rail to go into, something solid. You know, don't cut the opening so big that you're left with nothing behind your rail right here, because obviously the more, you know, screws that you can get to the structure behind, the better off you'll be there. But that was really the only tricky thing, you know, once you get those screws in there. And again, I think I might have had to buy these screws. I wanted something that was a little bit longer, since I only had 2 access points, to make sure it went all the way through. In fact, if I stick my finger on the other side, I can just barely feel the other side of that screw there. And, you know, here I'm not as concerned about it because I'm not reaching on the underside of that access panel wall. So that's pretty much it concerning mounting the slide to the access panel. And then as far as finishing details go, you can see up here one of the holes from the previous screws that held it to the wall. But as far as finishing details go, you can see you can add a little pull, a knob, like I've done here. I happen to just have these left over from a previous project, and they kind of looked like the rest of the decor in the Pinnacle, so I used one here to make it a little bit easier. But you don't have to. I mean, you can still slide it open and close pretty easily without having a knob there. So just something to consider. Now, while we're in here, I'll just mention one other thing for those curious and wondering what this extra piece of plywood is here. If you've got a Pinnacle or North Point, you're not going to have that from the factory. And what this is, I added this to support the residential PRV, the pressure reducing valve that I added. And I don't know if you can see it, but it's right back there, all that brass there. It's pretty heavy. And so this piece of plywood supports that PRV to make sure it doesn't go wobbling, you know, and wiggling around on the road. Now, for those who haven't seen my previous video, I did about a year ago a detailed video on adding a residential PRV to your rig, and I'm a big fan of doing this. You know, first benefit is obviously you don't have to then remember to drag out those little portable PRVs and put it on the campsite, hydrant, the spigot. You don't have to remember to retrieve it each time. But the other big benefit is the residential PRVs are a lot higher quality in terms of regulating the pressure. So, a lot of those portable ones, they're just kind of restricting the flow ultimately. And so what happens is if you open up one or two fixtures on your rig at the same time, or maybe the pressure at the campsite is pretty bad to begin with, you're going to suffer inside. You're going to have really low water pressure. So the residential PRVs are a lot higher quality. They kind of have more of a spring-loaded mechanism where they're going to be constantly adjusting up and down based on the input that they're getting. And so you end up with a lot more even and consistent water flow than in the rest of the coach. So I'm a big fan of doing that. So if you haven't seen my other video on that, I'll put a link up for it. Now that was done over a year ago, and pretty much everything I did the same here on my Pinnacle. The only thing that I did a little bit differently was the order. So in the video that I recorded previously, I had the water coming into the coach first, then going into the whole coach filter, the water filter, and then going to the PRV. And my thinking was, those filters, I don't care how high the quality is, the filters are ultimately going to reduce the water flow. And so, I really want that water flow to be consistent in the coach. And so my thinking was I'll put the PRV after that water filter, and the water filter will slow the pressure down a little bit, but then I'll still have that fixed, 40, 45 PSI or so in the rest of the coach. But I decided to switch it up on this one really just because I got a lot of questions, people asking, are you sure you want the water filter before the pressure reducing valve, or do you want it after? And so I thought, well, I'll just switch it up on this fifth wheel here and see how I like it differently. So it's been, about, I'd say about 8 months now of ownership, and I haven't noticed a big difference changing the order there, having the PRV first. In other words, here on the Pinnacle, I've got the water inlet on the other side of the Nautilus panel, and then the water goes straight into the PRV, and then it goes to the water filter and distributes to the rest of the coach. So haven't noticed a big difference, but for those curious in some of those details, that's what I did differently on this particular unit. Now, concerning that residential PRV being mounted inside the actual fifth wheel, not the outside, sometimes I get questions from folks and they ask, are you concerned about too much pressure at the inlet here on your fifth wheel? In other words, the pressure reducing valve is behind this inlet. So are you concerned about pressure, before here? Because this is all inside the wet bay, inside the envelope of your coach, And one thing I try to always do when I get to a campsite is just take a simple little water pressure valve and screw it on there to the hydrant, to the spigot, and just see what the water pressure is at. And it's pretty rare. I think most of the sites I've been at, and these are state parks, private campgrounds, most of them are going to be in the 40 to 80 PSI range. I think maybe one time I had one that was up around 100 PSI, but it's pretty rare to have something crazy like 120, 150 PSI and higher than that. So, I'm sure they are out there. Definitely let me know if you're watching this and you've been to a campsite that had extremely high water pressure. Definitely let us know what that value was. But it's pretty rare, and if I were to use this pressure gauge here and I were to see that it was 170 or 200 PSI, then I would probably take my kind of backup PRV and screw it on to the spigot there, the hydrant at the campsite, just as a protective measure. But the answer to that question in short is no, I'm not really concerned about it. The PEX plumbing and the fittings and everything that are used on these are typically rated up to 160 PSI. In fact, there's some builders that have done experiments on, what the break point of PEX and the Apollo style crimp rings are. And they're well north of 160 PSI. I think some of them failed, well over 500 PSI and so forth. So no, I'm not really concerned about that, especially since it's just going right through this inlet and then straight to the PRV on the other side. There's only about, I think, 2 crimp rings on the PEX pipe on the other side of that wall, and that's pretty much it. So not really concerned about that, but like I said, always a good idea to go ahead and check that PSI with a little gauge like this one here. And kind of related, I'll just mention another quick tip. If you're going to be gone from your campsite all day, typically I'll just shut the water off at the hydrant, so that the water is completely cut off feeding the RV, so that as you're gone, you don't have to worry about, something bursting and no one being around to shut that water off. So just another tip concerning this. But I figure I mentioned all that with the PRV and such in case folks are interested. So definitely check out that other video that I did about a year ago if you're looking for more detail on it. All right, well, I think that's about it on the sliding door mod. So I hope you found it helpful. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to drop me a comment below. But as always, thanks for watching.